Abandoned to die slowly from her wounds, the young Deltan female Uko twitched her antennae feebly, bioluminescent fluid leaking from cracks in her exoskeleton as she lay crumpled and broken in the filthy alley, until the human student Javine found her there. The year was 2547, and the distant planet Zeta Prime was home to a small but growing human colony, uneasily coexisting with the native Deltans, an advanced insectoid species whose relations with humanity were strained at best. 19-year-old Javine Bell, a student at the prestigious Zeta Prime Interspecies Academy, was lost in thoughts of his upcoming exams as he walked home alone through the dimly lit streets of New Jakarta late one night. Taking a shortcut through a narrow, trash-strewn alley, a strange high-pitched whimper suddenly reached his ears. Moving aside some discarded metal crates, Javine was shocked to discover the source of the sound, a critically wounded young Deltan female, her once strong exoskeleton now cracked and oozing. As the alien weakly raised her head to lock compound eyes with his, Javine knew he was facing a major decision. The fate of this Deltan, and perhaps the future of human-Deltan relations, now rested in his hands. If he walked away, she would surely die. But if he helped her, in defiance of the strict laws forbidding unsanctioned human-Deltan contact, it could jeopardize humanity's tenuous foothold on Zeta Prime. Javine hesitated, the weight of the choice before him almost overwhelming, knowing that what he did next would change the course of his life forever. Javine's heart hammered in his chest as he knelt beside the injured Deltan. His hands trembled slightly as he gently examined Uko's wounds. The edges of her exoskeleton were charred and melted, the telltale signs of an energy weapon attack. Who could have done this to her? Uko's compound eyes flickered weakly as she regained a sliver of consciousness. Her segmented appendage twitched, then slowly reached out to grasp Javine's hand. He could feel the feeble strength in her grip, her mandibles clicking softly as she tried to speak. Glancing around furtively, Javine slipped out of the alley, sticking to the shadows as he navigated the winding streets. He couldn't risk being seen carrying an injured Deltan. The consequences could be disastrous for both of them. As he hurried through the dimly lit city, questions raced through Javine's mind. Who had attacked Uko and left her for dead? What was the motive behind such a brutal act? And most pressingly, how could he help her without jeopardizing the already strained relationship between humans and Deltans? Taking Uko to a human hospital was out of the question. The authorities would get involved, and the diplomatic fallout could be catastrophic. But he couldn't just leave her to die in that filthy alley, alone and suffering. Suddenly, a thought struck him like a bolt of lightning. Zorthal, his old friend from the academy. The Deltan had studied xenobiology. If anyone could help Uko without involving the authorities, it was him. Javine abruptly changed course, heading towards the outskirts of the city where Zorthal lived. Time was running out for Uko. He could only hope that he would reach his friend in time to save her life. As he raced through the dark streets, Javine couldn't shake the feeling that this night was far from over. The mystery of Uko's attack loomed over him like a shadow, and he knew that uncovering the truth could lead him down a dangerous path. The lights were off at Zorthal's modest house on the city's edge. An eerie stillness hung in the air as Javine cautiously approached, Uko's limp form still cradled in his arms. The door stood slightly ajar, sending a chill down his spine. Javine nudged it open with his foot and stepped inside, his heart pounding in his ears. The living room was in shambles, furniture overturned, shards of glass glittering on the floor in the dim light. A lamp lay shattered, casting long shadows across the walls. "Zorthal!" Javine called out, his voice echoing in the unsettling silence. No response came. Swallowing hard, he made his way towards the back of the house, where he knew Zorthal's private lab was located. Each step seemed to thunder in the stillness. As he reached the lab door, Javine hesitated, a sense of dread washing over him. Slowly he pushed it open, the hinges creaking ominously. The scene that greeted him made his blood run cold. The lab was utterly destroyed, Equipment lay smashed and scattered, sparks sputtering from severed wires. And there, in the center of the chaos, lay Zorthal's lifeless body. His exoskeleton was riddled with the same charred, melted wounds that marred Uko's frame. Javin's heart sank as the realization hit him like a punch to the gut. Whoever had attacked Uko had also targeted Zorthal, but the question remained: why? What could possibly connect these two Deltans? Gently setting Uko down, Javin began to search the ruined lab for any clues. Overturned drawers, shattered beakers, scattered papers, and there, tucked beneath Zorthal's workstation, a small data drive. Javin snatched it up, turning it over in his hands. Could this hold the key to unraveling the mystery? With no other options and time running out, Javin made a decision. He would take Uko back to his own apartment, tend to her wounds as best he could, and try to piece together the puzzle of who was behind these attacks, and why they seemed to be targeting both humans and Deltans alike. Scooping Uko up once more, Javin cast one last glance at Zorthal's body, a mix of sorrow and determination welling up inside him. He wouldn't let his friend's death be in vain. No matter the cost, he would find the truth. Javin gently laid Uko's battered form on his bed, his heart racing as he grabbed his meager first aid kit. Opening it up, he rummaged through the contents: disinfectant, bandages, a feeble attempt at preparedness that now seemed laughable in the face of Uko's dire condition. Still, he had to try. As he cleaned and dressed her wounds, Javin's eyes kept darting to the data drive he'd found in Zorthal's lab. It sat on his desk, small and unassuming, yet potentially holding the key to this entire mystery. Finishing up his ministrations, Javin moved to his computer and plugged in the drive. The files were encrypted, but Javin's skills from the academy served him well. His fingers flew over the keys, and soon the secrets of the drive were laid bare before him. Human and Deltan medical research, all focused on something called xenocyte. As Javin scrolled through the documents, a picture began to form. Zorthal and Uko had been part of a clandestine project, studying this substance that seemed to possess incredible regenerative abilities. But there was a darker side to the research, hints of side effects of heightened aggression and unpredictable mutations. Javin's heart sank as the implications sank in. What exactly had his friend been involved in? A sudden violent movement from the bed jolted Javin from his thoughts. Uko was convulsing, her wounds pulsing with a sickly green light. Javin rushed to her side, trying to hold her steady, but Uko's strength was immense. Her eyes snapped open, glowing an eerie, unnatural hue that sent chills down Javin's spine. And then, as quickly as it had begun, the seizure stopped. Uko fell still, unconscious once more. Javin stepped back, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The xenocyte, it had to be. It was causing these reactions, changing Uko in ways he couldn't begin to understand. He needed to stabilize her, but the research was incomplete. He didn't have the knowledge he so desperately needed. The sound of splintering wood filled the air as Javin's apartment door burst open. Armored Deltan soldiers poured into the room, weapons drawn. Javin barely had time to react before he was grabbed, restrained by strong, chitinous arms. A towering figure in black armor strode forward, his voice a menacing hiss that filled the room. "You thought you could hide her from us, human? You have no idea what you've stumbled into." The soldier raised his energy weapon, pointing it directly at Uko's head. Javin's blood ran cold as he realized what was about to happen. He struggled against his captors, but their grip was unbreakable. The soldier's finger tightened on the trigger, the weapon humming with deadly intent. Javin watched helpless as the barrel pressed against Uko's temple. In that moment, he knew with horrifying certainty that he was about to witness an execution, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Time seemed to slow as Javin watched the Deltan soldier's finger tighten on the trigger, the deadly hum of the energy weapon filling his ears. In that instant, something inside him snapped. With a burst of adrenaline-fueled strength, he wrenched his arms free from his captor's grip, their chitinous fingers scraping against his skin as he lunged forward. Javin collided with the soldier, knocking the weapon from his grasp just as it discharged. The beam sizzled past Uko's head, scorching the wall behind her. The room erupted into chaos as the other soldiers opened fire, energy beams crisscrossing the apartment in a deadly light show. Javin threw himself over Uko, shielding her with his body as the beams seared his flesh. Pain exploded through him, but he gritted his teeth, refusing to let them take her. Suddenly, a blinding flash of green light engulfed the room, emanating from Uko's prone form beneath him. The soldiers, caught off guard, were hurled backward by an invisible force, their weapons clattering to the ground. Javin, his vision swimming, looked down at Uko in amazement. The wounds that had riddled her exoskeleton were knitting themselves back together, the xenocyte in her system apparently triggered by the stress of the situation. The eerie green glow pulsed beneath her mending plates, casting an otherworldly light on Javin's face. The Deltan leader staggered to his feet, his armor scorched and dented. His eyes, no longer filled with cold menace, were wide with a mixture of fear and awe. "You fools," he hissed, his voice trembling. "You have no idea what you've unleashed." He barked a sharp order to his soldiers, and they quickly retreated from the apartment, their footsteps echoing in the sudden stillness. Javin and Uko were left alone in the eerie green afterglow, the hum of the city filtering in from outside. Javin's mind reeled as he struggled to process the events that had just transpired. He had been drawn into a web of secrets and danger far beyond his understanding, and now, with Uko by his side and her powers growing more unpredictable by the moment, he knew that the path ahead would be fraught with peril. But he also knew that he couldn't turn back now. The fate of both their species hung in the balance, and he had to unravel the mystery of the xenocyte and those who sought to control it, no matter the cost. Javin took a deep breath, wincing as his scorched skin pulled tight. He met Uko's glowing gaze, a newfound determination settling over him like armor. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever dark secrets lurked in the shadows, he would face them head-on, for Uko, for Zorthol, and for the future of human and Deltan alike. The acrid stench of fear mingled with the dank, musty air of the underground tunnels, as Javin and Uko fled into the darkness, their hearts pounding in frantic unison. The eerie green glow emanating from Uko's exoskeleton cast ghostly shadows on the mildew-encrusted walls, their footsteps echoing through the labyrinthine passages like the beating of a terrified heart. As they navigated the twisting, turning corridors, Javin's mind raced, his eyes darting from the small data drive clutched in his trembling hand to Uko's luminous form beside him. The secrets contained within those files weighed heavily upon him, each revelation more disturbing than the last. It seemed that the xenocyte experiments were far more sinister than he could have ever imagined. Human and Deltan scientists, working together in a twisted partnership, had sought to create the ultimate biological weapon by merging the regenerative properties of the alien substance with the resilient physiology of the Deltan species. But something had gone horribly wrong. The experiments, instead of yielding the perfect soldier, had given birth to monstrous hybrids, unstable, highly aggressive creatures that defied control. Though the project had been officially terminated, whispers of a rogue faction persisting in the shadows, using unwitting test subjects like Uko, sent shivers down Javin's spine. As they delved deeper into the dank, oppressive tunnels, a sudden change in the atmosphere brought them to a halt. The air grew thick with the cloying stench of decay, and the walls bore the scars of a violent past. Shattered containment tanks and twisted, organic remnants littered the floor of what appeared to be an abandoned laboratory. Javin's heart leaped into his throat as a sound pierced the eerie stillness, a low, guttural growl that seemed to emanate from the very depths of the shadows. Uko's luminescent eyes widened in terror as they turned to face the source of the chilling noise. From the darkness, a creature emerged, its form a grotesque amalgamation of Deltan and xenocyte. Its eyes blazed with a feral, hungry light, its maw gaping wide to reveal rows of razor-sharp teeth. Javin felt his blood turn to ice as he realized the truth. They had stumbled into the lair of one of the failed experiments, and it saw them as nothing more than prey. Slowly, with hearts pounding and palms slick with sweat, Javine and Uko began to back away, their eyes frantically searching for an escape route amidst the carnage of the abandoned lab. But the creature, driven by an insatiable hunger, lunged forward with terrifying speed, its claws outstretched and its jaws snapping, ready to tear into their flesh. In that moment, as the monster closed in and the stench of its fetid breath filled their nostrils, Javine knew that they were facing a battle for survival unlike any they had ever encountered before. The secrets of the xenocyte experiments had led them into the heart of a nightmare, and now in the depths of the city's forgotten tunnels, they would have to fight for their lives against the twisted fruits of that unholy. In a flash of emerald light, Uko hurled herself between Javine and the monstrous creature, the xenocyte surging through her exoskeleton, granting her enhanced strength and speed. She collided with the abomination, grappling with it as Javine frantically scanned the ruined lab for a weapon. Amidst the debris, he spotted a jagged length of metal piping and snatched it up. Wielding the makeshift club, Javine leaped into the fray, striking at the creature's flanks as Uko struggled to keep it at bay. The monstrosity lashed out with razor-sharp claws, its maw snapping with brutal force. Javine felt the rush of air as a claw whistled past his face, missing by a hair's breadth. Uko and the creature traded blows, their strength evenly matched. Javine ducked and weaved, landing strikes when he could, the metal pipe vibrating in his hands with each impact. The battle was vicious, and despite their best efforts, both Javine and Uko sustained gashes and bruises, their blood mingling with the grime of the lab floor. Through sheer determination, and the power of the xenocyte coursing through Uko's body, they managed to drive the creature back. With a final, desperate lunge, Uko slammed the monstrosity against the far wall, and it crumpled to the ground, letting out a piteous whine before fleeing into the depths of the tunnels. Javine and Uko stood panting, their chests heaving with exertion. Javine leaned heavily on the metal pipe, his knuckles white from his grip. Uko's luminescent blood oozed from a deep cut on her arm, the wound pulsing with the same eerie green light that emanated from her eyes. Just as they began to catch their breath, the sound of footsteps echoed through the tunnel behind them. Javine spun around, raising the pipe defensively. From the shadows, a group of figures emerged, led by the same Deltan soldier who had attacked them in Javine's apartment. But as they drew closer, Javine realized with a start that the group was a mix of Deltan and human soldiers, their uniforms bearing the insignia of the shadowy organization behind the xenocyte experiments. A severe-looking human woman with cold, calculating eyes stepped forward, her gaze fixed on Javine and Uko. "You have caused us a great deal of trouble," she said, her voice as sharp as a razor's edge, "but your meddling ends here. The xenocyte project is too important to be jeopardized by the likes of you." She motioned to her soldiers, who raised their weapons, the barrels trained on Javine and Uko. Javine's heart pounded in his chest as he realized the hopelessness of their situation. They were outgunned and outnumbered, with nowhere to run. But before the soldiers could pull the triggers, a deep rumbling sound filled the tunnel, growing louder and more intense with each passing second. The soldiers looked around, their faces etched with confusion and fear. Javine felt a sinking realization settle in the pit of his stomach, a cold dread seeping into his bones. The creature they had fought earlier was not alone. Its brethren were awakening, drawn by the scent of blood and the promise of prey. The tunnels were about to become a hunting ground, and Javine, Uko, and the soldiers were now caught in the middle of a nightmare from which there might be no escape. The dank air of the service tunnel was thick with the coppery scent of blood and the acrid stench of fear. As Javine and Uko raced through the darkness, their hearts pounding in frantic unison. Behind them, the sounds of inhuman roars and energy weapons fire echoed through the twisting passageways, a cacophony of chaos that seemed to draw ever closer with each passing second. Uko stumbled, her luminescent eyes wide with pain and terror, as the xenocyte in her system pulsed and writhed beneath her cracked exoskeleton. Javine caught her, his hands slick with her glowing ichor, and half-dragged, half-carried her through the final few meters of the tunnel. They burst into a dimly lit maintenance chamber, the air heavy with the stench of rust and decay. Ancient pipes snaked along the walls, their surfaces pitted and corroded, while outdated machinery loomed in the shadows like the fossilized remains of some long-dead behemoth. Javin eased Uko to the ground, his heart clenching as she let out a low, keening moan of agony. Her body convulsed, the wounds that had only recently begun to heal now pulsing with an eerie, sickly light. The Xenocyte, it seemed, was not content to simply regenerate her damaged flesh. It was changing her, twisting her from within, just as it had the creatures that now stalked the tunnels. Uko's compound eyes, once a vibrant emerald, now glowed with a feverish, unnatural intensity. Her mandibles clicked and twitched, her voice a strained, distorted rasp as she looked up at Javin. "You have to go on without me," she whispered, her words punctuated by a grunt of pain as another spasm racked her mutating form. "Find a way to stop this madness, before it consumes us all." Javin felt his heart shatter, torn between his desperate desire to stay by Uko's side and the grim realization that he might be the only one who could unravel the secrets of the Xenocyte project and put an end to the horrors it had unleashed. With a final, anguished look at his companion, he made his choice. Turning away, he fled deeper into the tunnels, the weight of his decision bearing down upon him like a physical burden. Each step was an agony, a silent scream of grief and guilt that threatened to tear him apart from within. But still he ran, the echoes of Uko's final plea ringing in his ears, mingling with the distant howls of the Xenocyte monstrosities and the fading sounds of weapons fire. He had to find a way to stop this nightmare, to ensure that Uko's sacrifice would not be in vain. The darkness of the tunnels enveloped him, a living, breathing thing that seemed to pulse with malevolent intent. Javin's breath came in ragged gasps, his heart hammering against his ribs as he pushed himself onwards, deeper into the labyrinthine depths of the city's underbelly. He had no idea what horrors lay ahead, what fresh nightmares the Xenocyte project had yet to unleash. But one thing was certain: he would not rest until he had uncovered the truth and put an end to the madness, no matter the cost. Javin pressed onward through the labyrinthine tunnels, his torch casting eerie shadows on the damp, mildew-encrusted walls. With each step, the weight of his choice to leave Uko behind bore down upon him, a leaden burden that threatened to crush his spirit. Yet still he forged ahead, driven by the desperate need to uncover the truth behind the Xenocyte experiments and put an end to the nightmarish horrors they had unleashed. As he delved deeper into the underground complex, a disturbing change began to manifest in his surroundings. Strange organic structures protruded from the walls and ceiling, pulsating with the same sickly bioluminescence that emanated from the Xenocyte-infused creatures. The air grew thick and cloying, heavy with the stench of decay and an almost palpable sense of wrongness. Javin's heart hammered in his chest as the realization dawned upon him. The Xenocyte was not merely creating monstrosities, it was transforming the very fabric of the tunnels themselves, twisting them into a living, breathing hive of horror. The thought sent a shiver down his spine, and he tightened his grip on the torch, its flickering light now seeming a feeble defense against the encroaching darkness. Suddenly a sound shattered the oppressive stillness, a high-pitched, keening wail that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It echoed through the tunnels, reverberating off the walls and filling Javin's ears with its unearthly cadence. He spun around, his torch beam cutting through the gloom, searching for the source of the disturbance. From the shadows a figure emerged, its form twisted and grotesque. It was a Deltan, but one warped beyond all recognition by the insidious influence of the Xenocyte. Its exoskeleton, once smooth and segmented, now pulsed with malignant growths, glowing with an inner sickly light. The creature's eyes, no longer the compound orbs of a normal Deltan, blazed with a malevolent, alien intelligence that sent a spike of pure terror through Javin's heart. He stumbled backward, his breath coming in ragged gasps as the creature closed in, its movements unnaturally swift and fluid. A clawed appendage lashed out, whistling through the air with blinding speed. Javin barely managed to dodge the blow, feeling the rush of displaced air against his face as he twisted away. Panic rising in his throat, he turned to flee, only to find himself facing a dead end, the tunnel walls pressing in around him like the jaws of some great subterranean beast. The xenocite-infused Delton loomed before him, its maw gaping wide to reveal rows of jagged, razor-sharp teeth. It lunged forward, a predator moving in for the kill, and Javin braced himself for the searing agony of its claws and fangs tearing into his flesh. But the pain never came. Instead, a brilliant burst of energy slammed into the creature's side, sending it reeling away from Javin, its shriek of rage and pain echoing through the tunnels. Stunned, Javin looked up to see a figure standing at the other end of the passage, a smoking energy weapon clutched in one hand. As the figure stepped forward, the light of Javin's torch fell upon a familiar face, one he had never expected to see again. Professor Zakhar, his old friend and mentor, a brilliant Delton scientist who had vanished months ago without a trace, now stood before him, his expression a mixture of grim determination and profound sorrow. The professor's sudden appearance raised a host of new questions, even as it offered a glimmer of hope in the darkness. What role had Zakhar played in the xenocite experiments, and why had he disappeared? More importantly, could he hold the key to unraveling the mystery and stopping the spread of the alien horror before it consumed them all? Professor Zakhar reached out a steady hand to Javin, helping the young man to his feet amidst the debris-strewn tunnel. Zakhar's face was etched with lines of exhaustion and grim determination, his eyes reflecting the weight of the knowledge he carried. "Javin, we must hurry," he urged, his voice low and intense. "The xenocite infestation spreads with each passing moment. Our only hope lies in reaching the central control room and initiating the fail-safe protocol." Javin, his mind still reeling from the horrifying encounter with the mutated Deltan, nodded mutely, placing his trust in Zakhar's expertise. Together, they set off through the twisting, claustrophobic tunnels, their footsteps echoing in the eerie silence left in the wake of the creature's demise. As they navigated the labyrinthine passages, Zakhar's voice cut through the gloom, his words painting a picture of a project gone horribly awry. "I was there at the beginning," he confessed, his tone heavy with regret. "The xenocite held such promise, the potential to revolutionize medicine, to heal the most grievous of wounds. But the power it granted, it was too much for some to resist." Javin listened intently, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place as Zakhar recounted his tale. The Deltan scientist had tried to steer the project back onto an ethical path, but his efforts had been met with resistance and ultimately betrayal. Forced to flee for his life, Zakhar had watched helplessly as the xenocite experiment spiraled out of control. "Now the infestation threatens to consume the entire city," Zakhar concluded, his voice grim. "The central core must be destroyed, and the self-destruct signal sent through the network. It's the only way to ensure the xenocite can never be used again." As they approached the control room, the air grew thick with a sense of dread. The door, once a bastion of security, now hung off its hinges, the edges warped and twisted by some incredible force. From within, a cacophony of unearthly sounds echoed, the skittering of claws, the wet tearing sounds of flesh, and the low pulsating hum of the xenocite itself. Zakhar and Javin exchanged a look of trepidation before stepping over the threshold. The scene that greeted them was one of nightmarish horror. Xenocite creatures, their forms a grotesque fusion of organic and inorganic matter, swarmed over every surface, their movements jerky and unnatural. In the center of the room, a pulsating mass of xenocite towered over the control panels, its tendrils snaking out to merge with the machinery in a perverse symbiosis. Zakhar, his face set in a mask of determination, turned to Javin. "We must buy time for the failsafe to engage. Barricade the door while I access the control systems." Javin nodded, his heart pounding in his chest as he scanned the room for anything that could be used to fortify their position. Working quickly, he gathered debris and broken equipment, piling it against the ruined door in a desperate attempt to seal off the control room. The xenocite creatures, drawn by the sudden activity, began to converge on their location, their grotesque forms skittering and crawling over the impromptu barricade. Javin fought to keep his rising panic at bay as he watched Zakhar work feverishly at the control panel, his fingers flying over the keys with a speed and precision born of desperation. The seconds ticked by with agonizing slowness, each moment stretched taut with the knowledge that their time was running out. Just as it seemed that the barricade would give way under the relentless onslaught of the Xenocyte horde, Zakhar let out a triumphant cry. "It's done!" he shouted, his hand slamming down on the activation switch with a sense of finality. At first, nothing seemed to happen. Then a deep, rumbling vibration began to build throughout the complex, the very foundations of the structure trembling with the force of it. The Xenocyte creatures, sensing the impending destruction, redoubled their efforts to break through the barricade, their screeches and howls rising to a fever pitch. But it was too late. With a blinding flash of light and a deafening roar, the central core detonated, the shockwave of energy racing out through the tunnels like a cleansing fire. Javin and Zakhar were thrown to the ground, the breath driven from their lungs by the sheer force of the blast. For a long moment, they lay there, stunned and disoriented, the ringing in their ears drowning out all other sound. Slowly, painfully, they staggered to their feet, their bodies aching from the impact. The control room was a ruin, the equipment shattered and sparking, the Xenocyte creatures reduced to lifeless husks. They made their way back through the tunnels, now eerily silent and still, the once pulsating walls now dark and lifeless. The self-destruct signal had done its work, purging the Xenocyte from the network in a cascading wave of destruction. As they emerged into the streets of the city, blinking in the harsh glare of the sunlight, the true extent of the devastation became apparent. Buildings lay in ruins, their facades crumbled and shattered, while plumes of smoke rose from the wreckage of vehicles and debris. In the distance, the wail of sirens and the cries of the wounded and dying filled the air, a haunting chorus of pain and loss. Zakhar, his face haunted and drawn, shook his head slowly. "No," he replied, his words tinged with a deep, abiding sorrow. "The Xenocyte may be gone, but the scars it has left will take a long time to heal, and there will be those who seek to use this tragedy for their own ends, to turn us against each other, in the name of fear and hatred." Javin nodded, the weight of Zakhar's words settling upon his shoulders like a physical burden. He knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, that the wounds inflicted upon the city and its people would not be easily mended. But as he looked out over the ruined landscape, he felt a flicker of hope amid the despair. They had survived this nightmare, against all odds, and they would find a way to rebuild, to create a future where the mistakes of the past would not be repeated. And perhaps in time, they would find a way to heal the rifts that divided them, to forge a new path forward together. For now, though, there was work to be done, and Javin knew that he could not rest until... You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.